In this video, I wanted to shine some light on a very common trap that I see pretty much every single spiritual seeker falling into. And this trap actually prevents you from attaining the high states of consciousness that we're trying to attain on the spiritual path. The main trap that I've discovered recently is trying to get rid of the ego. Turns out you don't actually need to get rid of the ego in order to attain spiritual awakening. Thinking that you need to annihilate or destroy the ego is actually a very immature way to go about the spiritual growth process. And here is actually a much better, more integrated way that I've been learning from Ken Wilber, who's one of the best philosophers to ever walk the earth. And if more people start to think like this, basically, if more people understand the value of the ego, then we can learn how to work with the ego so that we can actually include the ego in our spiritual awakening. So first of all, I wanted to say that the ego actually exists. It is a real phenomenon. The ego actually is real. Now, many teachers will say, no, the ego doesn't even exist. It's not real, it's an illusion. And that's partially true, but it's very difficult. See, the ego is an illusion, but it's a real illusion. It actually exists. So the ego is you believing that you are a person, believing that you are a self. So whenever the mind or awareness is identifying with any finite form, that is the ego. So think about it like this. This empty whiteboard here, this is your true nature. Okay, this is what you actually are. Nothing at all. The ego is when awareness identifies itself with a finite object. So the truth is, you're not a human. You are the empty space of awareness. Okay? But what you have experienced for most of your life is the identification of awareness with a story, a narrative of me. Let's call it the story of me. So your whole life is basically the story of me. Whenever you wake up in the morning, you think, who am I? Oh, I'm Adam. And then you think of the story. What does it mean to be Adam? And then all of a sudden, your whole life becomes the story of me. Because your empty, vast, spacious, limitless awareness, which is always present and always here, which is actually the foundation of this present moment here, that vast empty space has become identified with a finite, limited form. So your awareness has actually been sucked in to the illusion of limitation, the ego. That's what you are. So whenever awareness identifies with any finite object, that is a self, that is the ego. So the ego, you can think of it as the tendency for awareness to think that it is something limited, even though it is not anything at all. It is actually unlimited nothingness. All right, so this ego, we think, okay, so if I now want to realize my true nature, if I want to become spiritually enlightened, then what I need to do is I need to get rid of the ego. all I gotta do is I gotta erase all this. There's no such thing as the ego anyway, so we'll get rid of it. And then what'll be left is just awareness, right? Well, unfortunately, that's not actually how it works, because the truth is that the ego exists. You, as a separate self, you actually do exist. Your story is real. Now, the thing is, for most of my past videos, I've been saying you as a separate self don't exist. And that's true. But now I actually want to take the opposite perspective. Both are true. But on the other hand, you as a separate self actually do exist. But you don't exist as a physical object. What you actually exist as is a story, an identification of awareness. This is why spirituality is so twisted and so complicated, because sometimes things are true in one context, but then in a different context it's not true, which is why this is the most difficult intellectual exercise that you can do, which is trying to understand the metaphysics of reality, spirituality. So you actually exist. You're the ego. You're real, okay? That's a breath of fresh air. Okay, Adam's telling me I'm real. Awesome. The thing is, you don't actually exist as a physical entity. Really what you exist as is a story, or the tendency of awareness to identify with a limited thing. Now, if one wants to attain spiritual enlightenment, what does that even mean? Spiritual enlightenment is the disidentification of the awareness with the finite ego. So the awareness needs to stop thinking that it is an ego, that it is a human. The awareness needs to remember that it is actually the blank screen upon which the ego is seen. So you are not an object, you are the eternal, timeless subject. You are always aware. You're always here. If you think you are a person, if you think that you are tall, you're short, you're funny, you're nice, if you think that you're mean, if you think that you're worthy, unworthy, if you think that you're cool, if you think that you're white or that you're black or that you're a boy or a girl, if that's what you think you are, what has happened is your infinite, timeless, featureless awareness, which is what you actually are, the one thing that is always present and always here, that is your true nature. That thing has identified with an object or a quality. In truth, you have no qualities at all, but you have mistakenly thought that you do have qualities. Now, in order to become spiritually enlightened, you need to essentially learn how to transcend the ego, to go beyond the ego, but also to include the ego as well. So whenever we try and transcend the ego by denying it, by trying to destroy it, or by trying to repress it, then what's going to happen is we're going to transcend the ego, but we're not going to include and embrace the ego. So if you transcend the ego by hating it, or by saying that it's something that's bad, that needs to be destroyed, or something that needs to be gotten rid of, then you're actually going to develop a pathology. And what that means is you're actually going to develop an ego allergy. So this is what happens when spiritual people do what's called spiritual bypassing, which is a serious problem. Spiritual bypassing, let's write it down. This is the word of the day. This is when you ignore a certain area of your life because you think you're just too spiritual in order to do that stuff. So for example, I'm gonna stop going to work because that's something that only egotistical people who are lost in the dream need to do. But me, since I'm so woke and I'm so spiritual, I don't need to work, I don't need to make money. That's an example of spiritual bypassing. Or something like, yeah, I don't need to pay attention to politics. I don't need to educate myself about what is an effective political system. I don't need to be an informed voter because all of that is just egotistical 3D Maya dream world stuff anyways. Only the sheep need to worry about voting, whatever. I'm too woke to have to worry about voting. So that's an example of spiritual bypassing. Or even like if you feel a very deep sense of unworthiness, if you deeply hate yourself, a lot of people have this. I don't know why you guys hate yourself so much, but I experience this sometimes too, where I hate myself. Either I've done something wrong, or I feel like I'm bad, or like something's just fundamentally wrong with me. That's a problem. That feeling, that emotion needs to be solved at the root with some kind of shadow work exercise, which we can get into in another video. But you actually need to do something about that emotion or that thought that I'm unworthy. Because if you don't do anything about that emotion, that's going to affect your life. Now, many people will say, well, Adam, if I just meditate and meditate and meditate, then I don't need to ever deal with that sense of unworthiness because none of that exists anyways. That's just a thought, and thoughts aren't real. Or that's just an emotion, and emotions aren't real. And reality's all a dream anyways. So I don't even have to worry about loving myself or about building a healthy ego because the ego doesn't exist anyways. So I'm just not even going to worry about that. That's spiritual bypassing. So the best way to attain spiritual enlightenment, if you want to have the fullest, most inclusive awakening possible, what is required is that you need to actually build a healthy ego instead of trying to destroy the ego. It's a big difference. Think about it like this. So your ego is kind of like a channel. This is kind of, imagine this is like a channel and there's water flowing through the channel. All right? So this water you can imagine as being awareness. This is the light of awareness. This water is like the pure expression of spirit. That you can think of this as God, spirit, universal energy, source. That's what the water is. That's your true nature. You actually are the water. The ego is kind of like a channel. It channels the water in a specific limited direction. Now, this channel, right, it's imagine it's like a pipe, right? So it has a rigid structure, okay? The universe has no choice but to work through your ego. If you want to share the gift of love and compassion with the world, the only way you can do that is through the ego. So the tide of awareness and love can only flow through this limited channel. Okay? The mistake that most people make. So this channel here is the ego, right? And then the water here, this is awareness, okay? Awareness must flow through this channel. If your ego is not healthy, then the awareness can't flow properly. So imagine that this channel was full of all kinds of moss and garbage and gunk, and there's rust on the pipes, and this channel's never cleaned. You never meditate. You don't self-reflect. You don't love and include the parts of yourself that you've been repressing and denying. This forms gunk and contortions in your channel. And now awareness, which is also love, the energy of love, it can't flow properly through the channel and out into the world. Many people are trying to share their gift with the world, but they're not actually interested in clearing out the gunk that has built up on their ego, which is their mind. So your ego is not something bad, not something that needs to be gotten rid of, but it's actually just something that needs to be made more healthy. It needs to be cleaned up. It needs to actually be developed and built into a healthy ego. If you try to prematurely transcend the ego, then that creates all sorts of spiritual bypassing problems, which we've mentioned. It can create an ego allergy, which means that anything that involves the ego, you just want to ignore and repress, and that leads to a dysfunctional life and also an incomplete awakening as well. So when we do something like meditation, that involves being more aware of the parts of ourselves which we have shoved under the rug. So that's cleaning out some of the gunk. If we do some journaling exercises, some shadow work, that cleans out more of the gunk. If we exercise and eat properly, that cleans out even more of the gunk. If we learn how to manage our finances and make money in a healthy way, that now we clean out more of the gunk. And even if we educate ourselves about how the world works, about politics and government, if we educate ourselves about how to help people and how reality functions, then now what we've done is we've actually built ourselves a healthy ego so that awareness, the love of God, can flow uninhibited by our egotistical contortions. All right, so what I'm saying here is that the spiritual path isn't just only about transcending the ego. That's half the battle. The other half of the battle involves including and loving the ego and actually developing it and building it. So if we can divide this board in half, all growth involves transcending and also including. So whenever you're trying to grow as a person, whenever any part of reality is trying to evolve up to the next level, we require an aspect of transcendence, which means we have to go beyond our previous level. But we also need to include all of the lessons that we learned at the past level. So, for example, when you're playing a video game and you're on the level 1, the first level of the game teaches you certain skills that you need to know for the rest of the game. So once you beat level 1, you learn all those skills, you've transcended the first level. You go beyond it, you move on to level 2. You're not stuck on level 1 forever, you move up to the next level. But you also need to include and remember all of the skills, all the ways that to jump, maybe you learned how to kill the enemies. You need to remember all of those things and include them so that you can bring those lessons with you and expand upon them on level 2. And the same is true when you go to level 3, level 4, level 5, and so on. So this is a metaphor for all of life, basically. Whenever you're growing, you need to transcend your old self, go beyond it, but also you need to include all of the healthy lessons that you learned. So spirituality is about going beyond the ego. So how do you do that? So transcending the ego means realizing that you are not any object. Okay, so you are not an object. Okay, you are not a spiritual warrior. You're not a witch. You're not a new ager. You're not a soul. You're not a gay person, a straight person, a transgender person. You're not anything at all. You're not a liberal. You're not a conservative. You're not a conspiracy theorist. No. You need to cease the identification with all names and forms. So you're not any of that. You're not an object. That's transcendence. And the ultimate way to do transcendence is that when you're practicing meditation, whenever an object comes up in your awareness, so that could be the emotion of anger, you're meditating, you feel angry. In order to transcend the anger, you need to realize that you are not the angry feeling, but you are the one who is aware of the angry feeling. You are not your depression. You are the one who is aware of depression. So if you've been struggling with depression, let's say, the problem is you are identified with being a depressed person. You're actually identified with someone who is depressed. In order to transcend that, ask yourself the question, who is aware of the someone who is depressed? So Adam is depressed. Okay, sure, Adam is depressed, but who is aware of Adam being depressed? What is that awareness? Adam isn't aware of himself. Adam is just being depressed. But who is aware of that? That's transcendence. When you're taking any sort of object or literally anything that exists, and you're taking a step back and you're asking the question, who is observing reality? Who is observing this object? That's transcendence. That's half the battle. Very important. So you need to transcend the ego. You need to realize that it's not what you are, so that you can move on and stops limiting you. You're not bound by the ego. But also, we need to include the ego. Because at the end of the day, as much as you transcend the ego, you still need to talk to other people. You still need to talk to your mom and your dad. You still need to work. You still need to make an impact in the world. You still need to go to the grocery store and buy fruits and vegetables for yourself. So we also need to include and embrace. We need to embrace the ego. And the way we do that is by developing ourselves and by working on ourselves in a relative sense. So when we're working on transcendence, that is when we're trying to go beyond ourselves completely. We're trying to go beyond all of our egotistical needs. But when we're working on the including, then what that involves is actually being in the world, being grounded, being an ego, be a separate self, and building the separate self using self-actualization principles, which I talk about here on this channel. So that involves working on your diet, working on your fitness, working on your business, working on your relationships. So yeah, it's true. At the end of the day, you can get enlightened, okay, you can transcend all of existence, sure, but if you have no dating skills, if you have no relationship skills, no business skills, if you're fat and overweight and you don't know how to exercise, then how beautiful is your enlightenment really? What's the point of being enlightened and awake if still you don't even know how to talk to a girl? Or still you don't even know how to make money. You're working at McDonald's and you know, yeah, sure, you've transcended the ego, awesome. You realized all of reality is a dream, but your dream still is McDonald's. You're still working at McDonald's in the dream. You still got to live in the dream. So transcendence is realizing that reality is a dream. Inclusivity or including is actually mastering the dream and living the best possible dream life that you can. All right, and that is basically all I have to say to you today. We were talking about why you don't need to get rid of the ego, but really what you need to do is just to go beyond the ego, but also to include it as well, to build the ego and make it healthy. So the Buddha talked about the middle way. And really, this is exactly what we're talking about here. The middle way is taking the halfway route between asceticism, which is the denial of everything, denying everything, and hedonism, which is being addicted to everything and being distracted and being chained up to reality. So asceticism would be going away, living in a cave and eating rocks for the rest of your life and sleeping on a bed of nails and completely denying everything. That's asceticism. That's too far to one end. Your awakening will be incomplete if you're only ascetic. And then hedonism, on the other end, would be just being pulled around by drugs and sex and food and always distracted. See, I think we have a bigger problem with hedonism in our Western culture. So it's important just to kind of move yourself to the middle. Okay, not going too far to this side, not denying yourself, not repressing, trying to destroy yourself, but a healthy middle way. And sometimes it's important to go on a meditation retreat, which is more ascetic. And other times it's important just to enjoy and to live your life, which is a little bit more hedonistic. Go to the beach, hang out, enjoy, go for a swim. So again, the main takeaway here is that the ego is not something that needs to be demonized or gotten rid of. The ego is just a tool through which God works through. So you want to make it into a healthy tool. You don't want to get rid of it. You want to actually improve it and hone it as an instrument of the universe. All right, that's all I have to say here. If you enjoyed this video, then leave it a like, thumbs up, subscribe. I got more content about spirituality on the way. If this gave you some insight, if you have some questions about this, leave it in the comment section below. I love answering questions. And stay tuned. I got more content, awesome content on the way, where we're going to be talking about a lot of the traps of spiritual seekers, especially a lot of the new age is just completely lost. They're going in the wrong direction. I'm looking at videos of spirituality content, but it's about finding your spirit animal and using crystals to heal your emotional problems. So I don't really agree with that, and I don't think that if you're interested in actually gaining like spiritual growth, actually growing yourself and realizing your true nature, then that has nothing to do with realizing what your spirit animal is or which crystal you need to put under your pillow. That's cool and fun. There's nothing wrong with that. Just for fun, if you want to do that, that's cool. But if you want genuine like spiritual awakening, where you actually realize what you are, then we need to go beyond that. We need to actually understand why the non-duality is so complicated, and that's what I love talking about. So check out my next video, linked over here. It's going to help you. I think maybe I'll talk about shadow work. Haven't made it yet, but check out this video here. And that being said, I hope this video was useful, and I'll see you in the next one.